Welcome to the BX Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Fowler, and we have another exceptional guest to share their insights and area of expertise with you on the show. Now, just before we jump into the episode, make sure you tap that follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast app to get more BX Podcast episodes right there in your pocket. Now, if you would like to find out more about BX and attend a meeting either in person or online, head over to bxnetworking.com/locations. That's bxnetworking.com/locations. Dianne Simboro is a recovery coach and behavioural profiler who, after surviving an abusive marriage, has spent the past 13 years working with literally hundreds of women survivors, providing court support, advocacy, and education. By unlocking the what happened and why behind family violence in a way that is easy to comprehend, she has found that survivors are more able to let go of their past, regain their confidence, and move forward to create a better future for themselves and their children. Dianne, welcome to the BX Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Really happy to be here. Yeah.
This first question is bold, and I know that this is going to really flow into our topic, but you married into a cult.
Yeah.
Tell us what happened.
Yeah. 43 years ago now, I met what is the Moonies, but now known as Family Federation for World Peace, or whatever you want to call them. Okay. And I joined it not knowing it was a cult. I thought it was a church. Yeah. And that's where I was chosen my partner, after a couple of years. And he was from Africa, so I ended up moving to Africa and starting my family life over there. So what happened was I ended up in a violent relationship, which wasn't aware of it at the time. Because it was a cult, we were encouraged to go a sacrificial path, a suffering path, So when you're conditioned to think that life should be a suffering experience, when you're going through a difficult relationship, you just think, that's par for the course. So you put up with a lot more than you should be putting up with, yeah? And when you come forward and say, this relationship is not as it should be, the very first thing the leaders in any cult will tell you is, you have a problem with your faith. If you just pick up your faith, you'll be okay, and your husband will come back and God will intervene, and, all these miracles will happen, which is just rubbish, cults are not good at dealing with family violence, and a lot of it takes place. Yeah, a lot of it takes place.
So take us back before you joined the cult, thinking it was the church.
Wow.
Where were you? What was running through your mind? And how did this come onto your radar to think this might be a solution for me and what I'm looking for?
I was never religious. In fact, I didn't like religious people. I was traveling the world before I met them, okay? I'd been traveling around Australia for a couple of years, and then I was traveling overseas for some years. What was going on in my head? I was going to England in order to get some work in the fish factories in Iceland, and you had to go through England in order to do that. I was really strapped for cash because the work that I'd tried to pick up across Europe didn't work out, So when I got to England, I landed in England, thought, okay, now I can get a job in the fish factories. I rang up the fish factories and said, okay, I want a job. And they said, there's no jobs this year. And I said, why? And they said they encroached upon the fishing boundaries the previous year. And so they were pushed back this particular year. So there was no fishing. They'd been punished. Yeah. So I was sitting in a Victoria Station, thinking, what am I going to do? Am I going to go home with my my tail between my legs in shame, or I'm going to stay and fight it out? So for a couple of hours, I stayed in the station to fight it out, and I decided I'm going to stay. Within 10 minutes of leaving that station, I met 4 church members, 4. Yeah. And I thought I'm going to meet them all day long, So my insert into the cult was I needed a place to stay that was cheap, okay? And they offered it, okay? So this is the thing. That's what you've got to understand. Sometimes people do things for no real reason, not pursuing a faith or not pursuing a truth, but it just happened to be there at the right time, that this intersected at the right time. So I went off to their farm because it was cheaper than staying at a hostel, and I stayed because it was cheaper than this. And then I thought, these people are really religious. This is really uncomfortable. And I got used to them. Because of the love bombing and everything like that. So, and then someone told me these people are not good people. And I thought, okay, I'm going to check them out and I'm going to join and I'm going to see if I can get behind the closed doors and I can see the truth that these are not good people, I'll expose them. But if they're good people, I'll stay. So that was my journey, and I literally joined from the very first day I met them, whereas most people, they took months to join. I was instantaneous. So, yeah, it was an easy mark. Easy mark. Yeah, yeah, really interesting.
So you're in a desperate situation. Yeah. You've come to this conclusion. You've intersected with these complete random people. Yeah. And it sounds like to me the circumstance of situation was what kind of opened you up to the conversation of, we're here to help you. We're here for a good reason. You've had an initial positive experience. You've gone into the church, and as someone's even warned you, this is someone, these people aren't good people. When you went into that and you were looking through the doors and you were looking into the church, what was your definition of this is a bad person, this is a good person? What was your definition of that? And how did you see it? Was it through rose-colored glasses, or was it through a sense of, this circumstance that you were in?
I did have rose-colored glasses. I was guided by my intuition when I was traveling. So I knew when I was in danger, I knew I was in danger, and I didn't get that sense. But just remember, the strategies of coercive control are universal, okay, and they're very effective. So when you go into something, it might not be necessarily what you're looking for, but as long as the person who's trying to convert you is getting a map of your world, meaning asking all of the right questions to understand what is it that you're looking for. If they can understand what you're looking for at this moment in time, how they can help, what your pressure points are, and they get all of that by asking you lots and lots and lots of questions and then pretending to be incredibly interested in you. So by sharing your information, what you're doing is you're giving them a map of your world so they know what to do in order to please you, okay? And that's typical coercive control, okay? And people who do it well do it very, very well, okay? And we all like to talk about ourselves. So we're all happy to give this information away if someone seems to be engaged in listening. So they will become what you want them to be. That's the problem. Yeah? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, it does. There's an identity shifting happening on their end to adapt to you.
Exactly. And if they do their job well, that's exactly what they do. Yeah? And so you don't know that you're being manipulated because we are innocent in the fact that we're naive, that we think if people are being good, that they are good. Do you know?
Yeah.
But there's a hidden agenda, and there's also a lot of pressure. The members who were out witnessing at the time, there's a lot of pressure for them to bring results. They're result driven. It's no different to a business. It is no different, How many
sales and KPIs.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what did you achieve this day? There's a reward. You didn't achieve that. On you go back out again, And so there's a lot of pressure. And that comes down from above. But people genuinely believe that they're doing the right thing. They genuinely believe that they're changing people's lives. But again, it's the strategies of coercive control, which I've become very familiar with. They are applicable. They're applicable in cults. They're applicable in intimate relationships. They're applicable in work relationships. You can find them everywhere. Yeah. But the problem with cults is there's an added layer. And the added layer of control is the spiritual dimension, You can neither prove nor disprove what they're saying is true until you die. And you don't come back and tell everybody, it's a lie, You don't.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not exactly a great way of coming back to share a message and find out a result.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the unknown, like the hope that you invest in this may be true, or I hope this is true, or I want it to be true, And then you start to become invested in creating that truth for yourself in many ways. Yeah.
It's creating a level of faith that there's something more, or something bigger than you out there, or something guiding your path, where there's actually a manipulation happening in kind of the thought process and the behaviors and the actions.
Yeah.
Now, this is something that happens in a lot of types of relationships, and it's prevalent sort of now more than just about any time is domestic violence, cult statuses, and so many different areas that this plays out in people's lives, whether they know it or not. And just coming back to your story here, we've only kind of touched a portion of it. And through, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here, but through this cult that, you've met somebody, you've got married, and you've gone to Africa. What was that experience like? Like, what was it kind of being said, you will marry this person? How did that feel for you? How did that come across? What were you feeling at that point?
Look, I didn't have happy relationships before, and I thought, okay, so if I'm not good at choosing a person for myself, let someone else do it.
Oh, right. Okay.
See if they get it right, and so you get caught up in the whole thing. I really didn't want to get married. I didn't want to have children. Didn't want any of those things. But over a period of time, you become conditioned to believe that this is the only path forward. So you have to participate, It took 2 years for me to be convinced of that. They had to work really hard to get me convinced that I had to be married. And then I thought, oh, what the hell, And then I decided, okay, give me the worst person, give me the worst man on earth. Let me go through hell, and then I'll become better as a result. You were thinking.
Was this a conscious thought or a subconscious thought?
I think it was very conscious. Honestly, I was saying that out loud, because I thought I just thought the more I suffer, the more transformed I will become. Weird. It's weird, because that's what cults do to you, is that you invite suffering, you become your own abuser. And that's the difficulty. And you actually believe that you're being transformed into something good as a result, So that's why it's really hard sometimes to get people out of cults, because you've got to undo that mindset, undo that belief, and it's very hard to shift, Yeah.
And the 2 year period, you mentioned before that your own self-belief was, well, I haven't had any good luck choosing a person. I might as well let somebody do that for me.
Yeah.
In those early years, and especially as you sort of came to that 2 year period just before you agreed to marry somebody, the worst person, Were your fears and self-beliefs played up on through that period to continue your kind of, well, let's just do the most honest term, for this self-deprecating spiral that led you to the final decision of being open to marriage?
Can you phrase that question in a different way? Because I'm not sure I really understand what you're trying to get at. Yeah, just say it again. Yeah.
Sure. So the self-belief that you held with, I've not had any luck with anybody, choosing myself.
Yeah.
It sounds like through that period to get to a level of, well, I'm just going to go marry, the worst person. There's obviously a lot that happens in that 2-year period, and it sounds like it's a self-deprecating spiral that kind of gets played upon and manipulated upon. Was that something that happened to you, and what's that kind of slow process manipulation like to actually get to that point?
I think it's a hard question to answer, really.
It's a very deep question, I know.
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer. I was ready to hand over. This is what I see when I take women to court, They're ready to hand over decision-making to other people. Any person who passes them when they go to court, they'll hand over decision-making to someone else because they're so uncertain of their own ability to make good decisions that are not going to turn out bad. They're so afraid to make the wrong decision. So in many ways, I was strongly conditioned to do that, hand over my decision-making, hand over everything, that I wasn't responsible for my life. But just remember, I'd done 2 years of pretty intensive conditioning, of being handing over my control for my life to someone else and becoming a follower rather than a leader, rather than a person who makes decisions for themselves. So it's really easy after that intensive period of time to hand that over, And also there were people around us who would brag and say, oh, this works out really well. He's so good at choosing people for you, and these are wonderful marriages, and they've got a 99% success rate. That was before lots of people got married. Downhill, that, because they ignored family violence, they ignored abuse, of children. Like, I don't mean sexual abuse, but there may have been, but there was physical abuse. There was control. So there were so many things we had to ignore in order to say these are really wonderful marriages. The other thing too about these marriages that is another aspect of coercive control, isolation. Okay, the women had to go to the husband's country. They were usually of different cultures and different backgrounds, sometimes not even speaking the same language. Okay, so that was really good, because there was no way to really communicate effectively if you didn't speak the language, or if you were isolated in another country where you had no system of support, where you didn't understand the culture or the language or anything, you're completely isolated. So it's spiritual isolation and physical isolation. The other thing about these relationships, and this happened quite frequently, is that I would overlook or dismiss any issues that we had, thinking it's because of our cultural differences. So I rationalized away poor behavior, thinking it's the cultural differences, rather than thinking this is family violence. So for years I managed to do that. So it's a very effective way of getting people into a relationship and keeping them there. One, it's based on it's based on a faith-based relationship. So you trust that the other person shares your faith. That was not the case in my situation. My ex-husband left the church, and he got kicked out of the church, and then he got kicked back to the church by his family because he was so badly behaved. He was going around everywhere, and the church knew it. And they still sent him to be married to me because they wanted the numbers. They wanted to fulfill the numbers required for the marriage, the big marriages that the Moonies have, So so they knew all of that when they handed him over to me, and they made me responsible. They couldn't control him, but they decided I would be able to control him because I was married to him. So it didn't matter what was going to happen in our marriage. It was all going to be okay as far as they were concerned. Yeah.
Wow, that is life experience that I hope not all that many people on this listening to this podcast right now can actually relate to.
Yeah.
But I'm also aware that it is a very common thing that happens more and more now.
Yeah.
Through this marriage that you've had cultural differences, you've moved to Africa.
Right.
And when did the distinction happen for you between the cultural difference versus the coercive control behaviors? When did you actually start to recognize this and separate the two in your mind?
Yeah, we came to Australia. I was lucky enough to come to Australia. We got the opportunity to come home. Yeah. And it took a very long time before I recognized, but I did leave him. I left my husband because he scared the living daylights out of me. I was 8 months pregnant with my second daughter. Okay. And most family violence, you'll find that pregnancy is one of the most dangerous times for a woman going through family violence. Yeah, it should be one of the times when you're safest, but it's one of the most dangerous times for women in family violence situations. So 8 months pregnant and had another toddler, and I left him because he scared the living daylights out of me. I went to my parents' house. He could find me. He came to visit. We had this quiet conversation behind closed doors. He said, I'm going to take your kids, and if you don't come back. So I went back. And my parents, you should have seen the look on my parents' faces. It was heartbreaking. But they didn't know what he'd said behind closed doors, and they didn't know the threat that he was leveling at me. And then I stayed. Unfortunately, when you go back to a relationship, and this is another thing women don't understand, when you do go back, you're choosing to go back, and the perpetrator of violence believes that you are coming back, giving them permission to act on their terms. Okay? So you're actually giving them permission to continue to abuse you. Yeah. Now that's something I didn't understand at the time, but I do understand now. Yeah. They see it as a green light to continue to do what they were doing before. And then I stayed until my children were teenagers. And I finally left. But that time when I left, I knew what was going on. I knew that I couldn't stay because I was telling my girls by staying that treating a woman this way is perfectly acceptable. And it just wasn't. It just wasn't. I thought by staying, and I stayed for as long as I did because of my faith. But finally, it's the abuse that, so I thought, what is the abuse doing to how I'm educating my girls? And if I educate my girls to say this is okay behavior, what they're going to do is jump into abusive relationships in the future. And I just couldn't tolerate that. So regardless of my faith, I got into trouble by stepping out of the relationship. Then I was very vocal about it. I said, you guys need to know more about family violence. So I'm going to give you some education. They weren't interested, but I decided I was going to go against my faith and make a stand, and that's exactly what I did. When I left, my husband thought I wouldn't stay away for very long. He didn't know me. I took 12 months to prepare everything, and I never looked back. Never went back. So,
and when you left, you came back. When was the moment that you went through this trauma recognition point of going, hang on, this is actually what I've been through. This is the signs that I ignored. I turned the other way from, or faith kind of pushed that perspective out of my mind. What was that recognition moment like for you?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because when women are involved in family violence, when they're in the middle of it, the brain functions very differently to the normal brain function of people in good relationships or in a normal life, okay? We have logic, ration, and reason, okay? But the facilities of logic, ration, and reason are gone when you're in a situation of violence, okay? And by violence, I mean abuse. I don't necessarily mean black eyes and broken limbs, so please don't misunderstand. I mean coercive control, a controlling relationship. So when you're in a controlling relationship, what you have available to you is only two things: adrenaline and intuition. And the reason you have only those two things available to you is you need to be able to make quick, rapid-fire decisions to keep yourself safe, okay? So that's what your brain is functioning with. The logic, ration, and reason is not there. And the reason it's not there is because it takes too long to logically, rationally, and reasonably make a decision in order to keep yourself safe. It takes too long. You could be in danger, yeah? So the adrenaline and intuition serves your needs at that time. So as soon as you leave the relationship, the brain function kicks back into place. And then you start to see what you simply did not see before. And you start to process it, and you start to accuse yourself. So women who step out of abusive relationships become their own abuser by saying, why did you stay so long? Oh, look at this, look what happened, and oh my God, look what you did, And so they become their own abuser. And that's the sad part, So it's a whole process. But a lot of people don't realize that those functions of the brain are shut down for safety, the only. So a lot of people will ask, why doesn't she leave? She can't leave because she's not processing very well. Do you know?
It sounds like there's a huge amount of adrenal fatigue, adrenal rush, high stress, which has been proven in so many studies to shut down certain portions of the brain or reduce functionality to focus more on a fight or flight response.
Yeah.
Which I just find it fascinating how the human body reacts to that sort of a situation. And the moment of leaving post leaving, the process of decompression, letting the adrenals drop, your adrenaline levels go down, your stress hormones reduce, what feelings then start to kick in? How does that start to play out in your body, your emotions, your reactions to things?
Well, I'll tell you a funny little story that 1 week after I left my relationship, someone said to me, you look 10 years younger. What happened? I left my husband, So yes, there was physical change. People could note physically. So the stress and the anxiety, the constant stress, constantly being on edge, obviously it reflected in my physical appearance, and so people noticed, but also for the first time, I could come home, my kids could come home, and we could breathe, we weren't afraid of the key in the door, we weren't afraid of when my husband would come through the door and we would know we're in for it, because that stress, it's such a relief, and I didn't know I could be so happy. I had a permanent back injury. I was only working 3 days a week. I could barely afford anything. We were in the most miserable place to live and everything like that, but I felt so happy. And you could see my kids were relieved, and it was worth the effort. So even going through the financial hardship and all of the things we had to face, it was so much easier than what we had been going through before. So it was a real bonus. Yeah, it was a real bonus.
I imagine that feeling of being able to be at home without fear of, the next person coming through the door, and having that relief feeling that you can come home and be safe at home is is probably the best thing in the world, or the best feeling in the world at that point.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple more questions just before we wrap up, and I do want to address the side of the abuser, and there's a lot of factors that would come into play, and you know, something that you acknowledged earlier was that you left because you kind of drew that line in the sand. You didn't want your girls to go through the same experience and know that that was not okay. From the abuser's perspective, what are some of the driving forces that keep them supporting family violence in their own lives and continuing this habit that they have?
The perpetrators, abusers, I call them serial abusers, people who do this on a regular basis, that's their lifestyle. They are purely benefit driven. What's in it for me? What's in it for me? What's in it for me? So they lack empathy, okay? So they don't care what happens to those around them. They care what's in it for them. So as long as there's a benefit in their behavior for themselves, they're okay with it, no matter what the consequences for anybody else. That's weird thinking for most people. It's a bit strange. Someone who lacks empathy, who sees someone they profess to love suffering and they're okay with it, is an unusual way to be. But that's what you have to understand about these people. They're also charismatic and charming. They know how to get relationships. They know how to secure those relationships. They know who they have to be, what they have to do in order to secure those relationships. Again, it's benefit driven. They select partners that they assess will be a good potential victim for them. So they I think they have an assessment list, and
a checklist of what to look for.
They're usually assessing several women at the same time. Okay. And then they'll choose the best possible option for benefit. So does she have a good job? Does she have property? Is there benefit for me in making a relationship with this woman? What are the benefits? How can I, is she a forgiving person? Is she willing to overlook my flaws? Can I mention to her that, the last relationship I had, this is what this woman did, In other words, he's saying to you, don't you do that because I won't be happy. He's already starting to condition you. He's already starting to tell you, don't do this and you'll be okay with me, And these people completely benefit driven. They love having control over people. They believe relationships or love equals ownership. Okay. We think love is a shared partnership, highs and lows, and we support one another. They believe love equals ownership. So when you say you love me, then I own you. Yeah. I can do whatever I like with you because you are owned by me, And
wow.
Yeah. So it's not, so when perpetrators talk about love, that's what they are believing. This is ownership. That ownership extends beyond the duration of the relationship. Even if the serial abuser goes on to have multiple other relationships, he still owns that other person. Get it? And the children.
Yeah.
And the children. Okay? When you go to family court, the men are benefit driven. They may not want the children because it may interfere with their next relationship, but they want the children because it's considered there's financial benefit in having access to the children. They don't have to pay as much child support, and also there's property benefit. They get a better size of the property settlement, and also they regain control of their former partner. So they are never stepping out of their lives. So benefit driven. If you can look at it that way, and it's all about ownership, Yeah. And you'll understand the mindset of the perpetrator. There's a bit more, but that's in a shell, basically.
There's only so much that we can dive into into a podcast episode, but it's just even having that high level perspective of it, you can see the level of selfishness that comes into play in that, and for those who are kind of looking for support or wanting to find a way out or thinking, hang on, something's not right here. Can you tell us a little bit more about your business, what you do, and some of the support that people can actually tap into?
Yeah. My business is Family Violence Mindset Solutions, because I'm all about revealing the perpetrator mindset, So I provide long-term recovery support for survivors of violence, okay? Because the conditioning that they've gone through, you need to undo that conditioning in order that you will not go through this revolving door of meeting the same sort of abusive people again. And also understanding the mindset of the perpetrator and how it's very different to us, to help them to understand how to move on and not to carry the burden of self-blame. So those are the two aspects that I deal with. I run support groups in collaboration with Mental Health Foundation Australia. I run family violence support groups, coercive control AOD, which is alcohol and other drugs support service that we're running. Also trauma PTSD group. And there's another group I run for KIFS, which is Cult Information, Family and Support, I think it's called. Anyway, and I run a support group for survivors of cults as well. Yeah. And the other thing I have is How to Thrive After Family Violence, which is a membership site. And that provides week-by-week webinars. It's a paid site, week-by-week webinars to help women manage the process of recovery over a period of time. Yeah. So those are the things that I offer. Yeah. Yeah.
Dianne, thank you so much for sharing your insights, your experience, your story. I know it's something that you've kind of devoted your life to moving forward in supporting people, and just having heard part of your journey in here, I know that there's more to it as well. I feel like there's kind of this wealth of knowledge. Unfortunately, it was gained, through experience in that way, but it's greatly appreciated being able to share that here on the BX podcast and to the people listening. And if someone listening is wanting to find support and looking for a group to connect with, then definitely reach out to Dianne. We'll put some links in the show notes to some areas that will help and support you along the way. Dianne, thank you for being a guest on the BX podcast. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation.
Thank you so much for giving me that opportunity. Thanks, Ryan.
That wraps it up for today's episode of the BX podcast. You can get more of the show by simply tapping the follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. To join us at a live and in-person or online event, head over to bxnetworking.com/locations. That's bxnetworking.com/locations to find a meeting near you. We look forward to talking to you next time on the BX podcast.